If you want to make a cutting board more practical for the home chef, add a juice groove like this to it. We at Rockler have a fully adjustable cutting board juice groove routing jig that's designed to make that job fast and easy with a handheld router on cutting boards up to 18 inches by 18 inches. If you're just starting out with this jig, or if you've used it already but you haven't quite gotten the results you were hoping for, here are some tips and tricks that should help. And here's a trick that I think will make the jig easier to adjust. The jig's frame adjusts both lengthwise and widthwise for a custom fit around square or rectangular board shapes, but you have to loosen some flathead screws on these blue corner guides for the jig to open and close. Now we used pairs of flathead Allen screws on each of these corner guides because knobs would have gotten in the way of the router, so that wasn't an option. But you don't have to loosen all 8 of these screws to adjust the jig. The only screw you need to loosen on these corner guides is this one. It's the screw that's farthest away from these little blue support brackets. So that means this one, this one, this one, and this one. You only need to loosen 4 screws. So here's the trick for choosing those 4 screws every time you use the jig, and it's simple. Just color the top of the screw head with a metallic marker or spray paint. The screws will immediately stand out as the adjustment screws, so you won't have to remember which ones they are over and over again. Now, routing a juice groove involves feeding your plunge router clockwise around the inside edge of the jig with this blue guide bushing pressed up tight against the inside edges of the rails. Now it's crucial that the guide bushing stay in contact with the rails at all times when you're making the cut. If the router accidentally veers off course, you'll ruin the cut. But there are some easy ways to prevent that from happening. So here's the tip, and it really is just good routing procedure. Use a plunge router and make many shallow passes. Don't be in a hurry to route the juice groove in just 1 or 2 trips around the jig. The deeper the cut, the more resistance you'll feel from the router, and the harder it will be to tell if this guide bushing is tracking along the rails correctly. You need very clear feedback from the router. So, route the groove in at least 3 or even more very shallow passes of increasing depth. The bit will make much smaller chips and finer dusts that are less likely to get in the way of the bushing and cause problems. Then stop routing after each pass and vacuum or blow away all the accumulated debris so you're starting clean each time. That's another tip. Keep the routing area clean. And of course, if your router has good built-in dust collection, by all means use it. Unfortunately, a lot of plunge routers don't, especially for template routing situations like this, so you're going to have to clean up the debris manually instead. But it's worth the time and effort to do it, and you'll get better results. Here's another problem you might wonder about: burn marks. How do you prevent the router bit from scorching the juice groove? Well, you can prevent some of that by taking lots of shallow passes, but here's something else that's just as important. Keep the router moving during a pass. If you stop, the bit will heat up the wood and probably leave a burn mark. You don't have to hurry, just try to keep a smooth, fluid motion going all the way around. And here's another tip to prevent burn marks. Use a sharp bit and keep it clean. A sharp bit cuts crisply. No big surprise there. But any router bit, regardless of how old it is, can also benefit from a good cleaning. Removing baked-on wood pitch will help the bit stay cooler, and that'll leave fewer burn marks in your juice grooves. Then give it a spritz with a dry lubricant such as Bostik blade coat. It'll help keep the bit cleaner longer because the pitch deposits will have a harder time sticking. Some folks have commented that balancing the plunge router on the juice groove jig can be challenging, that there's not enough contact surface of the router base on the jig to make the router feel stable, and sometimes it can feel tippy. Well, actually, support for the router comes from 2 places, where it makes contact with the rail here, but also from the guide bushing. The router base rests on the jig, and the guide bushing rests on the cutting board, so it's actually quite a bit of contact area. That tippy feeling is a legitimate concern, no question about it, but there are some things you can do to overcome it. For one, get your center of gravity down lower when you're routing. Rather than standing up like this, get down lower so that your arms are resting on your work surface. It'll give you an improved control over the router and a better center of gravity. Also, you have to get used to applying 3 different forces to the router at once. Down against the work surface, over against the jig, and around as you're feeding the router around the inside of the rails. The more you practice handheld template routing, the better you'll get at it and the less tippy it will feel. But if your plunge router is big and heavy, that can work against you. Switching to a smaller compact model in the 1 to 1 1/4 horsepower range can really help. A small lightweight router will definitely make the routing process feel easier. As long as the base will accept guide bushings, a compact router is totally up to the task for routing juice grooves. And here's one last tip. If it feels like the router is dragging on the jig, there's a couple of things you can try. Wood dust adds friction to the jig's contact surfaces. Cleaning it off with a soft cloth can really help. And so can rubbing a bit of furniture paste wax over the bottom of your router base and then buffing away the excess. It's amazing how much smoother a router base will slide with the help of a little wax. And the smoother it moves, the smoother your juice grooves will be. Juice grooves like these will definitely make your cutting board projects more practical. And I hope these tips and tricks make our cutting board juice groove routing jig easier and more enjoyable to use. I'm Chris Marshall with Rockler, and thanks for watching.